Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Amber, and today I thought I'd do something a little bit different, and I would talk about a haunted place. Now, not your typical haunted place, like, ooh, my house is haunted, but an actual historical place that has a lot of energy and is actually a really interesting story for me, myself, because I didn't know it was haunted when I first went there. It's going to kind of tie into the theme as this weekend is Remembrance Day, and I really wanted to do some videos leading up to it about soldiers and the war and just kind of things that pertain to that life, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I had mentioned in one of my videos that I really want to focus on a lot of Canadian haunted places, as I am from Canada, and it's just a little bit more accessible for me to potentially go there in the future, do live filming, and actually explore these places with you guys and that kind of thing. So I thought this was kind of one of the best places to start out with my own personal experiences there and the relevance that it has to soldiers and the military and that kind of thing. So without further ado, the place that I'm going to talk about today is the Fortress of Louisbourg, which is in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Now, the fortress is actually considered one of the largest reconstruction projects in North America. And I first went there when I was 10, I think. Might have been 12. It was a while ago, so I don't really remember when that happened. But I was on a trip with my mom and our family friends who used to live in my hometown and then relocated back to New Brunswick. And we decided to do this massive road trip all together. So we did all of New Brunswick, PEI, and then did Cape Breton. So one of the places we decided to stop was this fortress. Now, back then, I loved creepy stuff. I loved paranormal stuff. But most of the TV shows that I watched were in the States. So all of these places that I was hearing about, I didn't really have a way to go see them or a way to actually check them out. So in terms of stuff around Canada, I was really lost, to say the least. I knew that there must have been places that were haunted in Canada, but I didn't really know where to go, where to look, or where to start. Now, to kind of give you a little bit of a history on this fortress, the actual original settlement was first settled in 1713, and it was actually settled by the French. So it then began to be developed over several decades into a thriving center for fishing and a lot of trading. Now, it was completely fortified against the threat of British invasion during empire building and kind of the turbulent times of that era. And it actually was besieged twice before it finally got destroyed in 1760. Now, after that, it kind of laid untouched for a really, really long time. Then archaeologists began to reconstruct it to return it to how it actually looked in the 18th century. There's actually been two associations associated with this fortress and its rebuilding. So one of them is Parks Canada, and it's also the Fortress Louisbourg Association. You can actually go to the fortress and experience it as if you were literally transported back in time to 1744. It's the most amazing thing I think I've ever experienced. I love going to historical places and having reenactments done. And not just reenactments of like, oh, here's like a typical military reenactment where they all do the marching and they shoot off the guns and do the salute and they shoot cannons and whatever. But I mean, there are literally people dressed up in period clothing running their lives as if they were there in the 1700s. And they do interact with you to a degree depending on what you're doing. So you have two options when you go. You can either do a guided tour where somebody takes you around and they're fully in character and they go to all of these places and they interact with the other actors throughout the fortress, or you can just go and experience it for yourselves. And it's actually really cool because the actors who aren't actively talking to you actually acknowledge each other and go about their day as if you don't exist. So it's really interesting to kind of see the interaction of people like you just are a ghost walking through this space. And it's like a weird time loop that, you know, so-and-so is talking to this person about how much they would like for their bread order that day, or they're talking about some big party that they're going to go to, and so-and-so is hosting this party, or, you know, so-and-so got drunk last night. And they just, it's an embodiment of this entire world that we would have never known without them recreating it. They even have things where, like, you can sleep over in the fortress now. That was not an option back when I went. And they've got a ghost tour that they do at the end of the nights, which was also not an option back when I went. And it's just a neat place. I will put a picture up here somewhere to show you what the fortress looks like now. So I thought that I would actually start out with my personal experiences in the fort, and then just kind of go into what I found out after I had these experiences. So we had just finished doing PEI. We were back into Nova Scotia. I had family living there. We had stayed with them. We had stayed with them for the night on their beautiful property. And then we decided to continue our drive through and went to the fortress. Now, at that point in time, I was still fairly open to weird things happening and occurrences. And we opted to do the just go at your own pace, go around the fortress, see what you can find, see what you can do. They gave us a little pamphlet that told us when things would happen, so that if we were somewhere in the fortress and we wanted to go see it happen, or if we were somewhere in the fortress and we heard these weird noises, we could check the pamphlet and see what was going on at that time. They had cannon fire that would go off at a certain time of day, and they would have like a full military like reenactment of training and just that kind of thing. So there was a lot of things that you could go around and see and do. And so there was myself and my two really good friends, and then both of our moms. And we were kind of just let go to do whatever we wanted. It's one of those places that because it's encircled in a wall, it was really hard to leave without going through the main gates. Like, you couldn't just like go and start walking in a direction and get lost and never come back. You always had to meet. So we chose a specific area outside one of the restaurants, and which, by the way, is also done in a period setting. So we had chosen the restaurant as our meeting place, and if we had all decided that by like this time we would all meet back here and we would get something to eat and continue on our way. So my friend and I decided to take off, and we went and, you know, saw the pigs at the farm and played with the ducks and played with the geese, and we just kind of did those things that a whole bunch of little girls would really like to do. And, you know, we wandered around, we stopped and listened to conversations that people were having, we got to go into a lot of the buildings. They were open so that you could walk in and go through them. And I remember walking into one of the like posher houses. So it was obviously somebody's house that was wealthy. They obviously had a lot of money. It was very well decorated, very gorgeous, a really grand house compared to the other places that we had been already in this fortress. And I remember standing at the bottom of the stairs. So you walk in the door and there's the room in front of you, and then there's like a little hallway to go into another room, and then the staircase is right beside the hallway. And so staircases back then were tiny. Like, you could fit one person up and down them, and that's it. Like, they weren't big, grand staircases by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm standing there, and I'm watching these two actors carry about their day in front of me, and all of a sudden I look over, and I watch this little white cat come trotting down the stairs. I thought this was all well and fine. We had seen cats wandering around everywhere else. But as the cat reached the bottom of the stairs, it disappeared. So that was my first kind of like, oh, that's a little odd, but okay, experience. Later on, I was in another house, and you were allowed to walk upstairs in some of them. Because there were actually some actors like upstairs in these houses doing their little daily routines and that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go up there this time. So I walked up the stairs and watched the little scene play out in front of me. And then I turned around to come back downstairs, and I remember kind of tripping because they were a little bit uneven. And as I went to fall, I went to catch myself, but I actually felt something catch me and stand me back up. Again, I thought it was a little odd, and I thought maybe I had just like regained my balance fast enough that it didn't really faze me too much. I then went downstairs, walked out of the building, continued on my way. I went and found one of my friends again, and her and I were both like, let's go check out the tunnels, because why not? And so the tunnels were actually above ground, but they were like the tunnels underneath the wall. So you could walk through them and walk all the way around the fortress. And then there were like ladders going up to the top of the wall where the cannons were, and where the lookout tower was for the bay, and that type of thing. So we go over there, and it's just her and we walk into one of the doors that was open so that you could go in. And we're standing there, and like both of us kind of got that initial like, ooh, this is really creepy kind of thing. It's a tunnel. Of course it's creepy. It's wet. It's dark. It's damp. But there was enough light coming in from our door and the door further down the wall that you could actually see the light coming in, and it lit up the tunnels enough that you couldn't just not see. Like, it wasn't dark enough that it was just pitch black. You couldn't see anything. You could trip over everything. It was light enough that you could see all the way down the tunnel in both directions to each of the opposite doors. So her and I are like, okay, let's go in. We walk into the tunnel, and we turn towards one of the doors, and we start walking down because they've got like pictures posted up of the insides of the tunnels and what they would have looked like, and little information plaques all over the place. And we start walking down the tunnel, and we hear footsteps. So we stop, and we look around, and there's nothing there. So we kind of brush it off, but we're both a little shaken at this point. We get a little bit further down the tunnel, and we hear a man speak. Now, keep in mind that there are people dressed up all over the place as soldiers. So we figured maybe one of the actors was coming into the tunnel because that was just like part of their day. So we waited for somebody to show up. Nobody came. Nobody walked in any of the doors. Nobody was making any sound aside from us. And then we heard more footsteps, and we could hear, you know how there's that distinctive sound if you've ever watched reenactments where like you can hear them walking and their gun kind of like jostling on their shoulder and making all that noise, because at that point they were muzzle loads with musket balls and just like that kind of thing. Like, you could hear the sound of the gun moving on this person's back, and they were walking towards us. and nobody was there. As they got closer to where we were, we hightailed it to the other door and walked out of the tunnels. After that, we kind of just walked around, finished our day, bought some fresh baked bread, and left without telling our parents any of this had happened at all. About 2 weeks later, I was back home and I was remembering all of these events that had happened on the trip period, because we went to a lot of places where things happened. And I remember deciding that I was going to sit down and I was going to actually do some research. My dad conned me into watching TV again, which wasn't really hard. And we decided to watch a show the night that I was thinking about all of this. And I don't know if anybody actually remembers this show existing. I've had to look it up multiple times to make sure I wasn't going crazy that this show existed. But in 2002, there was a show called Creepy Canada. And it ran for 3 seasons on OLN. And I remember watching the reruns after it got canceled. And I remember watching an episode and I kept sitting there and I was listening to what they were saying and I went, I've been there. And my dad went, what are you talking about? I said, no, like when we were on our trip to Nova Scotia, we went there. And sure enough, this episode was actually detailing events from the fortress that were very commonly known. So after the episode ended, I ran upstairs, got on the computer, and started doing some researching. And what I found out was a lot of the things that happened to us that we just tried to play off, or happened to me rather, that I just tried to play off throughout my day there, it had actually been something that other people were experiencing and staff members were experiencing, and it wasn't as weird as I thought it was. So I finally decided that I was going to go and actually take note of all of this. And I remember reading all of the experiences and then yelling for my mom, who was downstairs, and being like, it's haunted. Oh my God. Like, I'm not crazy. And she just thought I was losing my mind, I'm sure. So I explained to her everything that had happened to us and then read her all of these stories. And she looked at me and she's like, I thought it was really weird because I heard some odd stuff that just didn't make sense. And I'm like, really? You heard stuff too and you didn't say anything? So I decided for this video, I'd go back, I would find those things. There's not really too much detail. There's just like little clippets of like what people are experiencing there. So there are 4 main hauntings that people are experiencing at the fortress. One of them is the sounds of a nurse crying, and it's heard within many areas of the fortress. And they've actually seen her walking through some of the rooms and just staring at the floor, sobbing. Now, if you think about that time and what would have been happening around then, how many people were getting injured every time that fortress got invaded, every time that fortress fell, diseases that probably hit, and just a lot of the tragedy that would have happened, being a nurse back then would have been really hard. Especially if you're watching entire families of your colony just dying. And I mean, back then, there was only a handful of people who were willing to go over there in the first place. So you would have gotten to know these people and be really close to them, potentially even your own family dying. So I could see why she would just be in a lot of distress. The other thing that's heard a lot from security guards and on the tours of people staying overnight is actually the sound of a baby crying in the early hours of the morning. Now, what is even stranger about this is that the sounds of the baby crying can be heard from a lot of places in the fortress, but when they go to investigate where the sound is actually coming from, knowing that there are no children in the area, they can't find it. And by the time they actually go to try and find where the sound is coming from, it stops, and there's no way to determine the area that it's coming from. So, also a little weird. They also say that they can see a captain who is actually walking around the fortress and just kind of doing his own thing. And he actually has approached some people and come up to them and told them, like, be very careful when you're walking on the walls so that you don't fall off. Now, that's really crazy to me, to think that this guy is actually manifested himself enough that all of these people are seeing him. All of these people are having this account of being like, hey, be careful while you're up there. Like, it's really high up. It's really slippery. Don't fall off the wall. I mean, he makes me feel really happy, because at least he's trying to help people and not hurt them. Which, on the other end of the spectrum, there is also a violent ghost there as well. And they have him cornered down to the bakery area of the fortress. He has been known to throw objects, to slide things across the floor in the bakery, and he had actually at one point moved a 300-pound piece of machinery in the bakery itself. If you think about it, it would have all been iron, it would have all been metal of some way, shape, or form, and this spirit, ghost, whatever you want to call him, was strong enough to move it. Now, I don't know how far, I don't know how much it actually moved, like if it was just a couple inches, if it was a couple feet, if it was across the room entirely, but he moved it. And that's not an easy feat for even a person. So I have to wonder how mad he actually is and what his unfinished business is. Other things that people have kind of talked about is the sightings of other soldiers walking through the grounds, other people walking through the grounds, children playing when there are none, and animals as well. So when I had found the tales of like people seeing cats walking around and seeing soldiers and hearing gunfire and hearing cannon fire and just all of those other things that I had experienced, because at one point too, I actually had to check the pamphlet to be like, oh, are they shooting their guns off in like this area? Because I could hear gunfire clear as day. And it wasn't set to happen for like another 2 hours. So the fact that I could hear gunfire was really, really strange to me. And it just kind of solidified everything, going back and finding out later that these experiences I had were real experiences that other people are having, and there was actually documentation of it. I loved that place so much, and I actually brought a couple of souvenirs home with me. They do have a couple of gift shops, and it's full of stuff that would have been around in the 1700s in this area. So 2 of the things that I actually got and brought back with me was a musket ball and a king's shilling. So I'll actually take these out, but you can still go buy these. They're really cool pieces of history, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but this is a king's shilling of King George II from 1745. So you can kind of see how it looks. And it's probably one of my favorite pieces that I've ever gotten as a souvenir from anywhere. Now, it doesn't actually say if this is a reproduction or if they were actually giving away king shillings. I don't have the price tag on this anymore, and I'm sure the prices have gone up potentially than when I was there, as that was a while ago. But it says the collection of New France, and on the back it says King Shilling, piece of money for King George II, 1745. So that was one piece that I brought home with me. And then the other thing that I brought home is this musket ball. And now it's heavy. Like, it's actually really heavy. You can see it. It's definitely there. It's got some weight to it. And it came with a little sheet that kind of explains what they are. So it says the smoothbore flintlock musket was an indispensable tool for the 18th and early 19th century militiamen, hunters, and farmers. This type of weapon, loaded with lead balls, most commonly of .69 to .75 caliber, was capable of firing at a rate of 2 to 4 shots per minute, but had limited accuracy. Musket balls were in use throughout the period of the American Civil War, although flintlocks gave way to the percussion or caplock muskets, and the ball itself was reduced in caliber. This musket ball is newly cast in lead-free pewter to closely approximate the original lead balls in size and weight. So obviously they're not giving away real musket balls. That would be incredibly dangerous for a lot of reasons. But it's really cool to have something like this that you can actually imagine what it would be like to hear these things being fired, to have this lodged in you if you got hit with one, and just to look back on the history of firearms and how we have evolved those things. If you guys have had any experience yourselves in the Fortress of Louisbourg, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear them. I'd love to know that I'm not alone aside from what I've read on the internet. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and make sure you turn on the notifications because I do upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until next time, bye guys.